New Year shrine visits, childhood rites, bean-throwing festivals. Japanese people do these without thinking. Surprisingly, they all trace back to a single belief system. That belief system is Shinto, and yet many Japanese people barely recognize the name. Because Shinto is so deeply woven into everyday life, it's practically invisible. Just as you can't understand European history without Christianity, you can't decode Japanese history without Shinto. Religion is essentially the grammar of history. So when did Shinto begin, and who started it? The answer to that question actually reveals everything about what Shinto truly is. Shinto has no founder, no sacred scripture. Unlike Christianity or Islam, it wasn't invented by anyone. Shinto didn't get created, it simply emerged. For ancient people, the world was terrifying and unexplained. Why does the mountain stand so tall? Why does the sun rise every morning? Without science, these were sources of genuine fear. Their answer? A god must be behind this. That wasn't lazy thinking. It was the most rational conclusion possible with the knowledge they had. Once a god is responsible became the framework, it explained everything. Mountains, rivers, storms, all accepted as expressions of divine will. Crucially, it also explained misfortune. Famines and disasters were seen as divine anger, and from that idea, rituals to appease the gods were born. Naturally, every region developed its own gods. Mountain gods, river gods, sea gods. Japan's incredibly diverse landscape gave rise to an equally diverse pantheon. Here's what's fascinating. These gods weren't handed down from above. Local people created them out of necessity. The community was always the true center of faith. Then came the Yayoi period, and rice farming changed everything. The moment food could be stored and stockpiled, the entire structure of power began to shift. Those who mastered rice farming accumulated wealth. By distributing that surplus, they gained followers. For the first time, a true ruling class began to take shape. But wealth and power brought a new problem: legitimacy. These early rulers had to convince people why they, and not someone else, had the right to rule. Their solution? Exploit the religious faith already deeply rooted among the people. By declaring, "My ancestors were gods," they instantly wrapped themselves in divine authority. Honestly, it was political genius. It might have been a lie, but no one could prove otherwise. Claiming divine descent was the ultimate argument no one could counter. Soon, rulers across the land were claiming godly ancestry. Naturally, they clashed, each competing to prove they were the closest to the divine. Out of that chaos, one supreme victor emerged, someone who defeated all the others. That is the origin of the Emperor of Japan. But the emperor faced the same challenge. With rival god-descended rulers still around, he needed to prove his lineage was the most sacred of all. His move? Unify the mythology. He compiled regional myths into one grand narrative, placing his own ancestor at the top as the supreme deity. That text became the Kojiki. In Japanese mythology, Amaterasu, the supreme sun goddess, is said to be the ancestor of the emperor. That single story gave imperial authority an almost unshakable divine foundation. The Kojiki, written in 712 AD, locked that mythology into official record. It was the moment rulers perfected the art of using sacred stories to justify political power. Shinto gradually shifted from worshipping nature to glorifying the imperial line. Then came a seismic disruption from outside: the arrival of Buddhism. Buddhism reached Japan in the 6th century via the Korean kingdom of Baekje. Born in India and refined over a millennium, it was philosophically far more developed than Shinto. Shinto had no clear answer to what happens after we die. Buddhism did. Reincarnation, karma, a whole cosmic system. People were genuinely amazed. Japan split into two camps: those who embraced Buddhism and those who feared it would anger the native gods. The debate turned violent, escalating into open, armed conflict. The pro-Buddhism faction won. The state began actively spreading the new faith, building temples across the country and elevating monks to positions of real influence. Here's where things get fascinating. Two competing religions clashed, and instead of destroying each other, they began peacefully coexisting with surprising ease. Why? Because neither was rigid enough to force a conflict. Shinto had no fixed doctrine, and Buddhism never demanded you abandon other gods. There was simply nothing to fight about. Buddhist thinkers then made a clever move, declaring that Japan's native gods were actually manifestations of Buddhist deities. They absorbed Shinto gods into their own worldview entirely. This was a strategy Buddhism used all over the world. Never reject local beliefs. Just reframe them within your own narrative. That flexibility is a big reason Buddhism spread so far. The result was a unique hybrid faith called Shimbutsu Shugo, the merging of Shinto and Buddhism. For over 1,000 years, it formed the spiritual backbone of Japanese life. Temples stood inside shrine grounds. Buddhist monks lived at Shinto shrines. It sounds strange today, but for medieval Japanese people, it was completely ordinary. The phrase kami-sama, hotoke-sama, calling on gods and Buddhas together, survives to this day. That blended instinct was etched deep into Japanese culture during this era. But after more than 1,000 years of peaceful coexistence, the Meiji government suddenly ordered Shinto and Buddhism to be forcibly separated. The Meiji government had a clear goal: build a modern nation-state with the emperor at the top. To do that, imperial authority needed to be absolute and unquestioned. The merged tradition implied that Buddha outranked the emperor, an unacceptable idea. Pure Shinto, with the emperor as a living god, was far more politically useful. The separation order triggered a violent wave of Buddhist persecution. Temples were destroyed, statues smashed. 1,000 years of coexistence was torn apart almost overnight. Stripped from Buddhism, Shinto was reborn as State Shinto, no longer a personal faith, but a government-controlled political apparatus. Schools distributed the imperial rescript on education. Children were systematically taught loyalty to the emperor and readiness for self-sacrifice. Belief became compulsory. Shrines were placed under government control. State-appointed priests staffed them, and shrines with imperial ties received higher official rankings. Shinto became a propaganda machine. The key distinction here matters enormously. State Shinto was a tool of power. Original Shinto grew naturally from people's wonder, gratitude, and fear of the unknown. The slogan Hakko Ichiu, uniting the world under one roof, was used to justify military expansion. Ancient mythological language became a banner for imperial conquest. Kamikaze pilots died crying, "Long live the emperor." The values driving them to that death had been drilled in through years of state Shinto education from childhood. State Shinto proved that religion can make people willing to die. That's perhaps the most powerful and most dangerous force any belief system can generate. Japan was defeated in 1945. Almost immediately, the Allied occupation issued the Shinto Directive, ordering a complete separation of the state from Shinto. Shinto itself was not banned. What was prohibited was the government controlling and exploiting it. That distinction is absolutely critical to understand. The emperor himself issued a public declaration of humanity, officially stating he was not a god. The central pillar of state Shinto quietly collapsed. Post-war shrines were reorganized under an independent body called the Association of Shinto Shrines. Each shrine regained autonomy, free from government direction. For the first time in roughly 1,200 years, Shinto was separated from politics. But ironically, it had already become inseparable from everyday Japanese life. New Year shrine visits, lucky charms, the Shichi-go-san ceremony, groundbreaking rituals. Most Japanese don't think of these as religious. They're just part of life. Here's something fascinating. Many Japanese people call themselves non-religious, yet regularly visit shrines. Globally speaking, that's a remarkably unique phenomenon. Is that a contradiction, or the very essence of Shinto? With no doctrine and no compulsion, Shinto may be a faith you practice without ever feeling like you're practicing a faith. If Shinto could be summed up in one line, it's this: a conversation between humans and nature. seeing gods in mountains and rivers. That instinct still lives in us today. The history of Shinto is also a history of how rulers exploit religion. From ancient chieftains to emperors to the Meiji state, Shinto was never far from political power. Yet each time, the people's simple faith survived. Rulers came and went, but festivals continued, shrines remained, and people kept pressing their hands together in prayer. The concept of Yaoyorozu no Kami, 8 million gods, sets Shinto apart. Unlike monotheism's single absolute deity, Shinto finds the divine in literally everything. That sense that spirits inhabit all things has shaped Japanese culture broadly. The values of caring for objects and respecting nature trace their roots directly back to Shinto. It's no coincidence that anime and manga are filled with gods and shrines. The mythological world Shinto built is deeply embedded in the Japanese creative imagination. Understanding Shinto is like reading the blueprint of Japan itself. History, culture, politics, daily life, traces of Shinto are woven through all of it. Thanks for watching. If this brought Japan into a little clearer focus, please subscribe. There's a whole world of Japanese history and culture we'll keep exploring together.